I'm going to use Sun Tzu's 5 principles of playing to plan the Iran war, which includes the moral law, heaven, oath, the commander, and method/discipline. First, the moral law. The moral law is if the opinions on the war from the ruler's POV matches the people's POV, but a large majority of US citizens don't support this war, obviously because gas prices and problem in democracy. Democracy, especially in America, has two clearly divided sides, and in recent politics, these sides have been engaging what I'm going to call anger movement to win elections. This is effective in winning but backfires after they're elected. This is because anything they do will get intensified by the public. This is also worse in this war since the government made very flawed propaganda. Instead of appealing to the undecided opinions, they would just try to make people already in favor of the war happy. They should have focused on Iran's crimes against its own people, but instead, the reason for the war was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which is very bad, but nukes are just a torment. As if one is launched, the enemy will reciprocate with its own nuclear arsenal. So the reason is flawed, especially since many Americans, especially young Americans, do not support Israel for many reasons, especially the contribution to corruption in US politics. Next, heaven. I'm not talking about a religious heaven. I'm talking about how Sun Tzu defines it. Basically, it is variables where you can't manipulate or only playing around. The 3 main ones are day or night, seasons, and temperature. Let's look at when to attack. For the best results, it is best to attack in the day because previous attacks on Iran has all been done at night. This is exactly what the US did, and after they should return to nighttime attacks with occasional daytime attacks. They did return to nighttime attacks after this previous encounter, but they gave up on trying to surprise their enemy in the daytime. Next is seasons. They attack probably at the best time, late winter entering spring. This makes warfare very effective, especially if this is a short war, and that was the plan lane. It was expected to last. Even though, as Sun Tzu says, to not fear 100 battles, you must know yourself and your enemy. The US did not know the enemy enough to predict the time span of the war. Temperatures directly relate to the seasons. It was very cold at night in the beginning of the war and warmed up over time. An additional factor I would talk about is the wind direction, which is very poorly planned in this war, since at the beginning of the war, since wind is always going to be a negative to the US side since it moves south where the majority of US forces are. It was at a all-time high in the beginning for like a week, which is bad. Wind, you may think, is not that much of a big deal, but it's these little variables that add up either in your or your enemy's favor that can determine the outcome of wars. Oath is next. This is self-explanatory. It's a terrain. Obviously, this has been made clear. Whoever controls the strait controls a big part of this war. This directly makes it a naval warfare war. Looking at Iran's actual terrain, we see it as very mountainous, especially in the west where most of the bombings are done. This also makes the war reliant on aerial warfare. This also completely eliminates sending ground troops, and if the US does do this, the US will lose the war. Unless they somehow quickly invade the country, but even that, they will still be guerrilla warfare, and guerrilla warfare just wins in this terrain no matter who is sent. Also, Iran has the support of undisturbed Caspian Sea, with their allies, mostly Russia, and supply them with weapons and resources with no threat. The supply chain allows them to keep fighting. The commandos next, who I would say is Admiral Brad Cooper. You could also debate that is the president, but Trump lacks military experience and is just staying the endpoint the US needs to reach, not how to reach that endpoint. That job is put on Brad Cooper, who was just hired just a year before the war by the administration. He was previously experienced in leading naval warfare, which is good since this war is naval and aerial based. This gives a bonus to our effectiveness in naval warfare. He does lack experience of a well-established commander like MacArthur, but we cannot judge his capabilities yet and other things that he actually performs. And it's very difficult to judge his performances since political parties distort his actual qualities. That is why I'm not going to use Sun Tzu's leadership qualities to judge him. Lastly, we have method/discipline. The US is very good at these and have been improving them constantly with actual combat experience. Especially the supply chain and its targeting of enemies. The US actually stole Iranian oil to contain the war. For the chain of command, is the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Commander, the Specialist Commanders in the field of combat, and lastly, unit level command, which focuses on individual missions. In conclusion, do I think this was a good war for the US to fight? Obviously, we can't leave them alone since they fund terrorist groups, but throughout my planning of it, I don't think direct conventional confrontation with them was a good idea. It would have been better to, as Sun Tzu says, the best way to win is to subdue your enemies without fighting. There's many ways we can do this, but I'm going to leave it at that for now.